All right, Evan, thank you. Mike Brown is a firearms instructor and criminal justice lecturer in the Chicago area, joining us tonight to talk more about this. Mike, good to see you. Is an armed society a safer one?
Absolutely. Absolutely. As you can see, this is evidenced, unfortunately, but fortunately, by the Greenwood mall situation where it was mall policy. Mall Group, they have a policy stating that you can't even carry in that mall. But he decided that he was going to put his safety and perhaps the safety of others over that private mall. And this time it worked.
What do you say, though, to people who worry that more people with guns, more violent crime?
They're entitled to their feelings. They are definitely entitled to their feelings, but the evidence from like the Rand Corporation and things of that nature, there's a lot of politics that goes into that. And I understand those political agendas, but when you call the police, if the police had no firearm to enforce the law and to protect you, who would you call? In these circumstances, you have to save yourself. And it's an unfortunate situation, as we saw at Robb Elementary, where you saw a ton of armed law enforcement officers there who absolutely did nothing. I guarantee you, I wish the teachers had something to save themselves.
Yeah, that situation stands alone because there's a lot of problems, and the response was a mess and delayed and just heartbreaking. This attack in Indiana, though, without that guy acting as he did, this situation could have been so much worse. It does seem like more and more people are mentally preparing, whether or not they're going out to get firearms or not, mentally preparing for the threat when they may face it.
That's true. That's true. And suffice it to say that there are a lot of people that do have concealed carry licenses that don't even carry firearms. You know, they say I have it in case I need it, but I don't carry it all the time. And I find that out when I do firearm renewal classes where I have to find myself reteaching those skills again. So I think it's more of the fear of a lot of people actually having firearms than the reality of, you know, an armed society being just this total chaotic society that they would want to drum up.
Should buying a firearm out of fear, though, be the way to go about it, or is that the reason for it? What advice would you give to people who are afraid, who say, I'm going to do something, this is what I feel like I'm going to do, but how they mentally prepare, because you shoot somebody, there's no going back?
Absolutely, yes. Now, fear is a driver to cause people to want to buy firearms. And I often teach not only the possession of firearms, but I teach a lot of behavioral management and anger management courses in my courses as well, as much as I can fit within 16 hours. I strongly urge people not to only try to get a firearm if you're able to, but also take other anger management courses, take other mental service courses where you begin to learn about anger management triggers, the triggers within you, the triggers within people around you, so you can learn conflict avoidance. That is the huge key that I often exercise, because training alone may not be enough to get you over that hump. One more thing, there's a lot of things that people do to put themselves in situations where they become victims of crime. When I taught in the colleges, it's a theory called victim precipitation, the things that people do where they're not paying attention, they're not aware of certain situations, and they put themselves in the position to be victimized. It's more than just carrying a firearm. So these courses are necessary.
Interesting. And mental health is such a critical component. So I'm glad you brought that up in terms of getting an application to get a gun. We saw the situation in Highland Park with the deadly parade shooting. As a result, Mike, the parade shooting in Highland Park on the 4th of July, the Illinois State Police have now modified the use of that clear and present danger report in getting access to a FOID card. How significant are these changes with ISP, the proposed changes, if they are to go through?
Well, I did read some of, not necessarily the proposals, but the same media release that they've used. Prior to, they required that it would be, I believe, I'm looking at my notes here, impeding, imminent, substantial, and significant. That the clear and present danger report had to have been something that was about to occur or had just occurred. And then they were able to take a look at it and then see, but there was nothing to state that they could keep these things on file. And so that's what these emergency privacy rules are proposing to do or purport themselves to do is to allow them to take a deeper look into a person's history as to whatever clear and present danger reports were put on file. Now, I understand the need to do something legislative politically, but the thing that I fear is the misuse of it. Just how long are they allowed to keep them on file? And what's to stop a person with maybe another agenda to perhaps use these reports to exercise that? What type of penalties could be in play? So there must be a balance here. And that's the hurdle they're going to have to cross.
As I read it, it was 150 days they could keep it on file. Important stuff. Mike Brown, always good to see you. Thank you for your time tonight.
Likewise, thank you.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.